To Firstpost America, where we're live in the nation's capital of Washington, D.C. And over the next few minutes, we'll take you from the U.S. and around the world, covering all the top stories of the day. But before that, here's a look at the latest headlines. Israel's defense minister vows to inflict the 10 biblical plagues of Egypt on the Yemen-based Houthi rebels after the group's increased missile attacks against the country. Thailand's acting prime minister says the country's royal officials have rejected a request by the ruling party to dissolve the parliament, clearing the way for a vote that could select his successor. Sweden's transport agency says the number of interferences affecting aviation over the Baltic Sea region has risen from 55 in 2023 to 733 so far this year. The agency says it's analyzed the data to find the origin emanating from Russian territory. The death toll from a railway cable car derailment in Portugal's capital, Lisbon, rises to 17 as the country holds a day of mourning. Authorities suspend the service of the 3 other trains for safety checks following the incident. And Samsung launches a more budget-friendly Galaxy S25 model with improved battery just days ahead of Apple's iPhone 17's launch. The South Korean firm also launched 2 tablets in its latest effort to roll out AI features across its hardware lineup. We begin with the latest from the Russia-Ukraine war, which has continued despite efforts to broker peace in recent weeks. Russian President Vladimir Putin said on Wednesday that Moscow would achieve all of its objectives through military means if Ukraine doesn't agree to a peace deal. Wrapping up his visit in China, the Russian leader added that an agreement to end the Ukraine war on acceptable terms could be reached if, quote-unquote, common sense prevailed.
Nevertheless, it seems to me that if common sense prevails, it will be possible to agree on acceptable terms for ending this conflict. We shall see how the situation develops. If not, we will have to achieve all the goals set before us through military means.
Now, speaking after his agreement with China on a new gas pipeline, President Putin said he would be willing to meet Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky if he traveled to Moscow. But he stressed that any meeting would need to be well prepared and produce tangible results.
By the way, Donald asked me to hold such a meeting. I said this is possible. At the end of the day, if Zelensky is ready, let him come to Moscow, and such a meeting will take place. It's a road to nowhere, just meeting with the head of the current Ukrainian administration. Let's put it carefully this way. It is possible to meet. I have never refused to do so, in case this meeting is well prepared and leads to some possible positive results.
Ukraine's foreign minister, however, reportedly dismissed Moscow as an unacceptable venue for the talks. In fact, on Wednesday, President Putin also spoke about the military situation, saying Russian forces were advancing on all fronts in Ukraine, while adding that Kyiv was not capable of conducting a large-scale offensive.
All groups of the Russian armed forces are advancing in all directions. They are advancing successfully at different rates, but practically in all directions. I will not list them. There is time to relax. Anything can happen. Ukraine could be readying reserves in order to carry out some actions of more or less large-scale nature. But preliminary analysis by our military specialists shows that the enemy does not have such capabilities today. They are not capable of conducting large-scale offensive operations and are only engaged in holding the existing lines.
Now, while Putin acknowledged that every country has the right to choose its own security system, he rejected Ukraine's ambitions to join the NATO alliance.
I agree with those who believe that every country has a right to choose by itself the system which provides its own security. This applies to all countries, including Ukraine. But it also means that security of one country cannot be provided at the expense of another country's security. In this case of the Russian Federation,
Putin, however, praised President Donald Trump, saying he saw a certain light at the end of the tunnel due to what he described as sincere efforts by the United States to find a settlement. Now, this came despite the U.S. president accusing him on Wednesday of conspiring against America with China's Xi Jinping and North Korea's Kim Jong-un. In responding to Trump's accusation, Putin said Trump had a sense of humor and described their relationship as good.
Well, the U.S. president is not without humor. It's clear. We all know this well. I have a good relationship with him. We communicate with each other on a first-name basis. I can tell you, and I hope he will hear this too, as strange as it may seem, but during these 4 days of U.S.-Russia summit in Alaska, during the most diverse negotiations, both informally and formally, no one has ever expressed any negative judgments about the current U.S. administration.
Meanwhile, at the White House on Wednesday, President Trump said he had no message for Putin and would wait to see what decision Russia takes regarding the war.
I have no message to President Putin. He knows where I stand, and he'll make a decision one way or the other. Whatever his decision is, we'll either be happy about it or unhappy. And if we're unhappy about it, you'll see things happen.
President Putin's comments came as Ukraine's Zelensky said he had yet to see signs Russia wanted to end the conflict that began over 3 years ago. Zelensky met with European leaders earlier on Thursday in Paris to discuss security guarantees for Ukraine in the event of a peace accord. The guarantees by the so-called Coalition of the Willing have so far remained under wraps despite growing speculation in the media. However, reports do indicate the discussions are part of an effort led by French President Emmanuel Macron to show Europe can act independently of Washington.
We are ready as Europeans to offer security guarantees to Ukraine and the Ukrainian people the day a peace deal is signed. This is the commitment we made in Washington. The contributions that were prepared, documented, and confirmed this afternoon at the level of the defense ministers in an extremely confidential manner allow me to say the preparatory work is complete.
And Zelensky is also expected to meet with President Trump later on Thursday, discussing the possibility of new sanctions against Russia. But despite diplomatic efforts, fighting continues on the ground, and the path to a peace deal remains uncertain as leaders on both sides maintain firm positions. And now to South America, where tensions between the United States and Venezuela are escalating. Hours after President Donald Trump claimed the U.S. had hit what he called a Venezuelan drug vessel, the country's president, Nicolas Maduro, said that imperialism is launching a new attack. Without directly mentioning the United States, Maduro declared that Venezuela would stand in peace and sovereignty against what he called imperialist threats.
No es la primera ni la última.
Today, the imperialism is launching a new attack. It is not the first, nor will it be the last. It is just another attack, and Venezuela stands firm, and I say to you, Venezuela will continue standing with serenity, firmly, and strong faith in victory and in peace.
Now, these comments came after President Trump confirmed that American forces had destroyed a Venezuelan speedboat in the Caribbean, killing 11 people on board. Trump released a video of the operation on Truth Social and claimed the vessel belonged to the Tren de Aragua cartel, which Washington has officially designated a terrorist organization and claims that it's backed by the Venezuelan president. In Caracas, the reaction to the attack was one of outrage. Venezuelan Interior Minister accused the United States of committing extrajudicial killings, claiming that 11 lives had been taken without due process.
Supongamos que era droga.
What the United States presented as a strike against drug traffickers was nothing more than an illegal massacre in international waters. They violated international law, they violated their own laws, and worst of all, they violated a basic human principle, the right to life. This wasn't justice, it was barbarism, an imperial act meant to show force. But it only exposes, once again, the double standards of the Washington administration. They talk about democracy and human rights while carrying out summary executions at sea. If you're not guilty, you have nothing to fear. Here in Venezuela, we can speak openly about this because we are not accomplices to drug trafficking or executions in open waters. We do fight drug trafficking, no matter where it comes from.
El que no la debe, no la teme.
A Venezuelan opposition figure also expressed concern, casting doubt on the U.S. narrative, questioning how Washington knew the identities of those killed and demanding greater transparency from both governments.
El poder aquí en Venezuela dice
How do we know there were 11 people?
que fue inteligencia.
Did they count them on the boat? How do we know they were Venezuelan?
Y la gran
Did their ID cards float to the surface afterward?
Maduro dice que fue inteligencia artificial.
Meanwhile, President Trump on Wednesday justified the military strike and said it was a necessary effort by the U.S. to send an unmistakable message to Latin American cartels. He went on to add that the operation would cause drug smugglers to think twice about trying to move drugs into the United States.
On the boat, you had massive amounts of drugs. We have tapes of them speaking. It was massive amounts of drugs coming into our country to kill a lot of people. And everybody fully understands that. In fact, you see it. You see the bags of drugs all over the boat. And they were hit, obviously. They won't be doing it again. And I think a lot of other people won't be doing it again when they watch that tape.
Now, the Pentagon has not disclosed how the strike was carried out, whether by drone, torpedo, or another method, and has avoided providing details of the legal authority that allowed for such an operation. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said Venezuela was being run by a narco state and emphasized that the 11 deaths sent a direct signal to traffickers that the United States would no longer tolerate their operations in the hemisphere. He also added that U.S. naval and air assets would continue to target suspected cartels, but declined to provide further operational details, saying they remain classified.
You want to try to traffic drugs? It's a new day. It's a different day. And so those 11 drug traffickers are no longer with us, sending a very clear signal that this is an activity the United States is not going to tolerate in our hemisphere.
And Secretary of State Marco Rubio also defended the operation, saying that military operations against cartels would in fact continue.
We'll stop them is when you blow them up, when you get rid of them. So they were designated as what they are narco-terrorist organizations. So the same information and the same intelligence mechanisms with maybe a higher focus was used to determine that a drug boat was headed towards eventually the United States. And instead of interdicting it on the president's orders, he blew it up. And it'll happen again.
Venezuelan officials have said that the Caribbean buildup is meant to justify an intervention against them, with President Nicolas Maduro accusing Donald Trump of seeking regime change.
Cientos misiles y un submarino nuclear.
On a human level, if you asked Nico, that is, me, what message I would send to Mr. Donald Trump, President of the United States, I would say, seek peace. In us, you will always find a friendly hand for peace, for development, for independence, for dignity, and with respect. The pursuit of regime change is exhausted and has failed as a policy worldwide.
Absolutamente criminal.
Now, Venezuelan officials say the Tren de Aragua cartel is no longer active after being dismantled during a prison raid in 2023, and suggested that the video shared by President Trump was created using artificial intelligence. The operation, however, comes as U.S. naval forces expand their presence off Venezuela, with 8 Navy ships deployed in the Caribbean and the Pacific as part of counter-narcotics missions. Now, with 11 people dead and both sides trading accusations of aggression and deceit, the strike has pushed relations between Washington and Caracas into uncharted waters. Whether this was an isolated act of force or the start of a much larger confrontation, however, remains to be seen. And here in Washington, where President Trump appears to be locked in a standoff with the nation's courts, in recent days, a string of judicial decisions have created major roadblocks for the president's policies and executive orders meant to reshape the nation. Several high-profile rulings have placed the judiciary as a check on the White House at a time when observers say the Republican-controlled Congress has largely stepped aside, giving the president more room to advance his agenda. In fact, many of his policies, from immigration to tariffs and the restructuring of the federal government itself, are now tied up in legal challenges. Here are some of the recent rulings that have gone against the White House. On Wednesday, a U.S. judge overturned deep funding cuts to Harvard University, which had frozen more than $2 billion over allegations of anti-Semitism and bias at the Ivy League school. U.S. District Judge Allison Burroughs of Boston, an Obama appointee, said the administration had quote-unquote used anti-Semitism as a smokescreen for targeted, ideologically motivated attacks on the nation's premier universities.
It is clear, even based solely on Harvard's own admissions, that Harvard has been plagued by anti-Semitism in recent years and could have done a better job of dealing with the issue. That said, there is, in reality, little connection between the research affected by the grant terminations and anti-Semitism.
However, the administration, which vowed to appeal, argued that its move was legally justified, citing Harvard's alleged failure to protect Jewish and Israeli students during campus protests against Israel's war in Gaza. White House spokeswoman Liz Houston said Harvard had no constitutional right to taxpayer funds and remained ineligible for future grants. Harvard, however, has denied all claims of the administration, saying President Trump was seeking to control the university's hiring, admissions, and curriculum. Then last week, a U.S. appeals court ruled that most of President Trump's tariffs were illegal, undercutting his use of them as a key economic policy tool. The court said Congress had not given the president wide-ranging authority to impose tariffs, but for now the tariffs remain in place after the court delayed its order until October. On Tuesday, the president said his administration would ask the Supreme Court for an expedited ruling.
Going to the Supreme Court, we think tomorrow, because we need an early decision. I mean, look, the financial fabric of our country, we're a rich, incredible country right now, and we're able to, other countries use tariffs on us for years.
Then on Wednesday, President Trump warned that the U.S. may have to, quote-unquote, unwind trade deals with the European Union, Japan, and South Korea if his administration loses the case.
A very big case in the Supreme Court. I can only say this. Our country has a chance to be unbelievably rich again, but it can also be unbelievably poor again. If we don't win that case, our country is going to suffer so greatly.
What's the backup plan, sir?
But I think we're going to have a big victory.
And turning to the third major ruling against the administration, a federal judge on Tuesday reportedly blocked the government from using the military to fight crime in California as President Trump threatened to deploy troops to more U.S. cities, including Chicago. San Francisco-based U.S. District Judge Charles Breyer ruled that the administration had willfully violated a law known as the Posse Comitatus Act, which sharply limits the use of the military for domestic enforcement.
There is no question that federal personnel should be able to perform their jobs without fearing for their safety. But to use this as a hook to send military troops alongside federal agents wherever they go proves too much and would frustrate the very purpose of the Posse Comitatus Act.
Now, Breyer put his ruling on hold until September 12th, and reports suggest the Trump administration plans to appeal. Now, on the same day, an appeals court also ruled against the president's use of wartime law to deport alleged Venezuelan gang members, blocking its application in some southern states. So as the cases move forward, some of which may be challenged by the administration, they're shaping up to be high-stakes legal showdowns that could define the scope of President Trump's second term. And finally, energy drinks have always been sold as power in a can. For years, they've raced through classrooms and playgrounds, leaving health experts and parents alike worried. Now the UK government is drawing a line, preparing to ban the sale of high-caffeine energy drinks to children under the age of 16. In a move aimed at curbing health risk in developing bodies that range from sleepless nights to abnormal heart rate. With hundreds of thousands of children already hooked, the battle ahead is not just about policy, it's about breaking a habit built on buzz. A final report has all the details.
The UK is getting ready to take the fizz out of high caffeine drinks. The government has announced plans to ban sales of energy drinks to anyone under 16 in England, in a move designed to curb a growing health threat. Shops, cafes, restaurants, and even vending machines all will be barred from selling drinks with more than 150 milligrams of caffeine per litre. But this is not just policy on paper, it is a battle brewing on paper. For years, supermarkets imposed their own voluntary ban. But many smaller stores continued selling these drinks to children. The numbers are striking. Between 2013 and 2018, a third of teenagers between 13 and 16 years of age consumed high caffeine drinks every week. By 2018, surveys showed over 250,000 children were drinking energy drinks several times a week. More recent data shows that at least 100,000 children now consume one or more energy drinks every day. But why has energy drink consumption in children become an issue all of a sudden? Doctors say this is not just about a burst of energy. It is about developing brains in growing bodies being hit by doses of caffeine meant for adults. The result can be poor concentration, disrupted sleep, anxiety, rapid heart rate, and even abnormal heart rhythms. The sugary versions of these drinks can cause damage to teeth and contributes to obesity. And although rare, excessive caffeine intake has been linked to seizures and death. The government's move has been applauded by health experts and doctors.
8 in 10 parents want to see this ban. Teachers who are seeing the impact of caffeine on behaviour and concentration. And of course, lots of these drinks are not just high caffeine, but high sugar. So in terms of childhood obesity, there's a real challenge.
The main way that these energy drinks have their effects is through caffeine and other stimulants. Now, these can have those effects on multiple parts of the body. They can increase the heart rate, the blood pressure. They can make you feel like you're not tired, even though you've had only 4 hours sleep. And these are marketed to improve concentration, to lift energy levels, but specifically in children, they have developing brains, they also have smaller bodies than adults, and so they can be more sensitive to these effects. And that can lead to poor concentration, increased anxiety, difficulty sleeping, as well as causing abnormal heart rhythms or potentially worsening heart disease in people who were born with problems with it.
Energy drinks are marketed as products that boost alertness, stamina, and performance. But their contents raise concerns for younger consumers. Along with high levels of caffeine, they often contain stimulants such as guarana and taurine. These can amplify caffeine's effects and place extra strain on the heart and nervous system. For children, the effect can be dangerous. To put things into perspective, a can of cola contains around 40 milligrams of caffeine, a cup of tea around 50, a double espresso has around 80 milligrams, but one of these energy drinks can hold up to 150 milligrams in a single can, the equivalent of 4 colas poured into a single can. For adults, up to 400 milligrams of caffeine per day is considered safe, and for children, leading pediatric groups say the limit should be 0 for the youngest, and just 100 milligrams for adolescents. Parents are worried. A survey says 82% of parents feel concerned about the effect of caffeine on their children. Even shopkeepers support the move, though some warn it may turn drinks into a forbidden fruit, tempting children to steal them rather than stop.
I'm all for it. The caffeine content can be high. And I think it's an addiction as well. There's going to be a kickback from the younger generation who don't understand the new regulations. Also, I think there's going to be an element of theft because it becomes a naughty item.
Now, the move has not been enforced yet, but a 12-week consultation is open. Low caffeine drinks, such as soft drinks, will not be affected by the ban. Nor will tea and coffee, but the UK is preparing to act. And when the ban takes hold, the cans that once fueled young hearts will remain as reminders of a time when energy was sold in bursts, but health paid the price.
That's going to do it for us today. We certainly thank all of you for tuning in. We look forward to seeing you right back here again tomorrow. Thanks everyone for tuning in.